The scorching afternoon sun beat down on the dusty trail as Thomas Brennan rode his horse through the vast expanse of the New Mexico Territory. He was a man shaped by hardship, a former cavalry soldier turned drifter who had seen too much violence and carried too many regrets. After leaving the army, he had wandered the frontier, taking odd jobs, avoiding towns when he could, and seeking something he couldn't name in the endless horizon. That particular day in the summer of 1878, Thomas was heading toward a small settlement to pick up supplies when he heard it. A child's scream, sharp and terrified, cutting through the still air like a knife. His military instincts kicked in immediately. He spurred his horse forward, following the sound over a rocky ridge, and what he saw made his blood run cold. A young native girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, was trapped on a narrow ledge halfway down a steep ravine. Above her, loose rocks continued to tumble, evidence of the landslide that had caught her. Below was a drop of at least 40 feet onto jagged rocks. The child clung to the crumbling edge, her small fingers white with effort, her eyes wide with terror. She wore traditional Apache clothing, and Thomas could see she was losing her grip. Without thinking, Thomas dismounted and assessed the situation. The ledge was too narrow and unstable for him to climb down directly. He grabbed his rope from his saddle, tied one end to a sturdy juniper tree, and secured the other around his waist. "Hold on," he called out, though he wasn't sure if the girl spoke English. "I'm coming." He began his descent, testing each foothold carefully. The rocks were treacherous, shifting under his weight. Halfway down, a large stone gave way beneath his boot, and he swung wildly, slamming into the ravine wall. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and continued. The girl's fingers were slipping. He could see her arms trembling with exhaustion. "Just a little longer, sweetheart," he murmured, moving faster now, reckless with urgency. He reached the ledge just as her grip failed. His hand shot out and caught her wrist, the sudden weight nearly pulling him off balance. For a terrifying moment, they both hung there, suspended between earth and air. Then Thomas found his footing, pulled the child close to his chest, and secured her with one arm. "I've got you," he said softly. "You're safe now." The climb back up was agonizing. The girl wrapped her arms around his neck, her small body shaking with fear and exhaustion. Thomas's shoulder screamed in protest, his hands were torn and bleeding, but he didn't stop. Hand over hand, foot by careful foot, he hauled them both back to solid ground. Once at the top, the girl collapsed onto the grass, breathing hard. Thomas sat beside her, his own chest heaving. He offered her water from his canteen, which she accepted with trembling hands. She looked at him with large, dark eyes full of questions and wariness, but also gratitude. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then whispered, "Kaya." "I'm Thomas." "Are you hurt, Kaya?" She shook her head, but he could see scrapes on her arms and legs. He was checking her injuries when he heard the sound of approaching horses. Multiple horses, moving fast. Thomas stood slowly, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun, then stopping. If this was her family, drawing a weapon would be the worst thing he could do. 3 Apache riders crested the ridge, and the lead rider pulled up sharply. Thomas found himself staring at the most striking woman he had ever seen. She was tall and proud, with long black hair that flowed behind her like a dark river, high cheekbones, and eyes that blazed with a mixture of fear and fury. She wore traditional dress decorated with intricate beadwork, and despite the desperation evident in her face, she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. The woman leaped from her horse before it had fully stopped and ran to Kaya, dropping to her knees and pulling the child into her arms. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her hands running over her daughter's body, checking for injuries. Kaya responded, pointing to Thomas, and the woman's eyes snapped up to meet his. For a long moment, she studied him with an intensity that made Thomas feel exposed, as if she could see every mistake he'd ever made, every life he'd taken during the war, every regret that haunted his nights. Then she stood slowly, her daughter held protectively behind her, and spoke in clear, accented English. "You saved my daughter's life." Thomas nodded, suddenly awkward. She was in trouble. Anyone would have done the same. "No," the woman said firmly. "Not anyone. Many would have ridden past. Some would have done worse." She glanced at the 2 men with her, older Apache warriors who watched Thomas with guarded expressions, then back to him. "I am Nadia. This is my daughter, Kaya. We are in your debt." "No debt," Thomas said quickly. "I'm just glad I was nearby." Nadia studied him again, and something in her expression softened slightly. "You are hurt." She gestured to his shoulder, where blood was seeping through his shirt from where he'd hit the ravine wall. "Come. Our camp is not far. We will tend your wounds." Thomas hesitated. He had fought against Apache warriors during his time in the cavalry, had seen the brutal aftermath of conflicts on both sides. Going to their camp could be dangerous. But looking at this woman, at her fierce protectiveness and genuine gratitude, at young Kaya peering around her mother's skirt with those wide, trusting eyes, he found himself nodding. "Thank you. I'd appreciate that." The Apache camp was a collection of wickiups nestled in a hidden canyon, invisible from the surrounding plains. As they rode in, Thomas felt dozens of eyes on him, felt the tension in the air. A white man in their camp was clearly unusual, possibly unwelcome. But Nadia spoke sharply to those who approached, and whatever she said made them step back, though their suspicious gazes remained. Nadia led him to her wickiup, where she tended his wounds with skilled hands. As she worked, cleaning and bandaging his shoulder, she told him her story. Her husband had been killed 2 years ago by soldiers during a raid. She had been raising Kaya alone, moving frequently to avoid the forced relocations to reservations. She spoke of the desperate struggle to maintain her people's way of life in the face of an encroaching world that wanted them erased or contained. "Why do you wander alone?" she asked, her dark eyes meeting his. "You have the look of a soldier, but you travel with no purpose." Thomas found himself telling her things he had never spoken aloud. About the war, about the orders he had followed that still made him sick to remember, about the native villages burned, about watching men on both sides die for causes that felt increasingly meaningless, about returning home to find his parents dead and his farm foreclosed, about having nowhere to belong anymore. "So you run from your past," Nadia said, not unkindly. "But the past runs faster. It always catches you. What else can I do?" Thomas asked, surprised by the desperation in his own voice. "Stop running. Face what you have done. Find a new purpose." She finished bandaging his shoulder and sat back. "You saved my daughter's life today. That is one good thing. Perhaps you can find more good things to do." Thomas stayed with the camp for 3 days while his shoulder healed. It was the strangest and most enlightening experience of his life. He had only known Apache people as enemies, as fierce warriors who fought desperately to protect their land. Now he saw them as families, as people who laughed and argued and loved, who told stories around fires and sang to their children. Kaya became his shadow, following him everywhere, her initial wariness replaced by complete trust. She taught him words in Apache, giggled at his pronunciation, and showed him how to weave grass baskets. Through her, and through Nadia's patient translation, Thomas began to understand what he had been part of destroying. On the 3rd evening, as Thomas sat with Nadia watching the sunset paint the canyon walls gold and crimson, she spoke quietly. "You should stay." Thomas looked at her in surprise. "Here? Your people don't want me here. I can see it in their faces. They are suspicious, yes. But you saved Kaya. You have been respectful. And..." She paused, and for the first time, Thomas saw uncertainty in her strong features. "And I think perhaps we need each other. You need a purpose. Kaya needs a father. And I." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I need someone who understands both worlds, who can help us navigate this changing land." Thomas felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening after being locked for years. "Nadia, I fought against your people. I was part of the cavalry. I did terrible things. And you regret them," she said simply. "That matters. Many do not regret. They do not see us as human. But you see Kaya as a child worth saving. You see me as a person worth listening to. That is the difference." Over the following months, Thomas proved himself to the camp. He used his knowledge of military movements to help them avoid patrols. He hunted, contributed, learned their ways while sharing knowledge of the changing world beyond their canyon. He taught Kaya English, knowing that understanding the language of those who sought to control them would help her survive. He learned Apache traditions from the elders, who gradually accepted him with grudging respect. And somewhere in those months, as summer turned to fall and fall to winter, Thomas fell in love with Nadia. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It grew slowly, built on shared conversations, on watching her fierce devotion to her daughter, on her wisdom and strength, on the way she challenged him to be better than he had been. He loved how she never let him wallow in self-pity, how she pushed him to use his guilt as fuel for positive action rather than letting it consume him. Nadia's feelings developed more cautiously. She had loved her husband deeply, and his loss had left a wound that was slow to heal. But Thomas's gentleness with Kaya, his genuine efforts to learn and respect Apache ways, his quiet strength and his willingness to face his past mistakes, gradually won her trust and then her heart. They married in the Apache way, with ceremonies that Thomas barely understood but participated in with reverence. Kaya beamed throughout, having told anyone who would listen that she had known all along that the man who saved her would become her father. Life was not easy. The world was changing rapidly, and the Apache way of life was under constant threat. There were close calls with the cavalry, difficult decisions about when to move and when to stand firm, struggles to find enough food during harsh winters. Thomas used his connections in nearby settlements to trade, to get early warnings of military movements, to advocate for fair treatment whenever possible. He taught Kaya and other children in the camp to read and write English, believing that education would be armor in the battles to come. Nadia taught him the deeper meanings of Apache spirituality, the connection to the land that made forced relocation not just an inconvenience but a spiritual death. Years passed. Thomas became known in the territory as the White Apache, viewed with suspicion by both sides but respected by those who knew him. Kaya grew into a strong, intelligent young woman who could move between worlds with a grace her parents had helped her develop. More children came, including a son who had his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn determination. Thomas never forgot that moment on the ravine, reaching for a terrified child, choosing in that instant to help rather than ride past. That single decision had given him back his humanity, had led him to a love he never expected, and a family he didn't deserve but treasured with every fiber of his being. On quiet evenings, when Nadia sat beside him and Kaya visited with her own children, Thomas would think about fate and redemption. He had been a lost man, haunted and aimless, running from a past he couldn't change. A child's scream had stopped him in his tracks, and a fierce, beautiful woman had shown him that the past couldn't be erased, but it could be honored by building a better future. "What are you thinking?" Nadia would ask, seeing the distant look in his eyes. "That I was saved that day too," Thomas would reply. "Not just Kaya. You both saved me." And Nadia would smile. The smile he had learned meant she was about to say something wise. "We saved each other, Thomas. That is what family does."